Hello world, it's Angelat, and right now I want to take you through making a visualization in Block Builder with a data set prepared for us in a block. So this is a data set I've been working with for the D3 meetups. We've actually done a couple of these get together, hack on a data set events, and this particular data set is one of a few about the migrant crisis in Europe. So I've cleaned up the data from, well, not really cleaned up, but prepared the data from the migrants files in a GitHub repo, and then I'm actually loading that data from a CSV. So basically, the migrants files has a few Google spreadsheets that contain all this data, and I just put it into a CSV file and process it here for you. So basically what we'll do is go from this, which is the raw data. It's already been processed into something more programmatically friendly for D3. For instance, we're turning this field, which is price year 2014, into just a number stored in price. And then I'm going to show you how to use d3.nest in a few ways to come up with a bar chart like this. So this is actually something I did with a couple people to show them the basics of D3. We turned that data into this simple bar chart. It's nothing too pretty or exciting, but I think the process is interesting. Shouldn't take very long, so let's get to it. So as usual these days, I'm going to use Block Builder. My little bookmarklet just changed the URL from blocks.org to blockbuilder.org. And here we will see the exact same thing with the code. Here, I'm going to spend most of my time in side-by-side mode. There's a new feature where you can resize the code editor, which is quite convenient. So now we can see the rendering on the left, which is just rendering out all the JSON, and the code on the right. If you want the code really wide and then you're like, well, what is actually going on, you can click this and it will pop up the rendering. Unclick it and put it back. Another note is that this is always 960 pixels wide. That's the standard width of a block. You can go into full screen mode, which will just take up the whole area of your screen. But most of the time I want my visualizations to fit inside the 960 by 500 that blocks usually renders at, which is this sort of standard mode. This is 960 by 500. So let's get started. First off, let's take a look at some of this code, which is here we're stringifying the JSON of the processed data to output it here. You can see that we have a year, we have a price in euro, the service. So this is all about the money that migrants have spent to get from where they're migrating from to someplace in Europe. So they start somewhere and then they end somewhere else. And unfortunately, these start and end locations are not in sort of a structured way, or they're in a semi-structured way. It's usually city, country, but sometimes it's just city or country, or ends in Europe, right? As always, the data could be better. I don't think I've ever worked on a visualization project where the data was perfect. There's always something that you wish was more convenient for you to tell your story. But for now, we're just gonna do take a look at a couple of things that we can't see in this data. For example, there's these routes. So this East Mediterranean land, so traveling through the East Mediterranean by land, or sometimes there's a missing route, Central Mediterranean plus. So there's a few of these things, and one of the first things I always want to do is I look at the data, the raw data itself, but there's, I think, thousands of entries here, so I can't obviously just scroll through and see what all the potential routes are. So d3.nest is a great way that we can find out what all the routes are and how many entries are in each route. So what I'm going to do is nest, basically you, in SQL, this would be the group by here, this key. So we're going to say for each route, count up all the entries, which the leaves would be the entries for each route. And the entries, we tell it, come from the data. And then I'm going to use console.table to display those routes. So let's see what that looks like. And I'll just need to make this bigger. I can... Let's see, why is this stuff not rendering? There we go. I'm also going to comment out these other two tables so that we can just see the routes. So we can see that this table, the values from the routes, we have for each key one of the routes, and then a count of how many entries correspond to that route. So the West African route is by far the most traveled. There's also several which are there's no route recorded, and then we go on down. Now, we'll notice that there's East Med C, East Med C plus. If we were telling a story, we would want to go into the methodology, which is covered in the original site, I think themigrantsfiles.com. So they have a couple of stories already, actually, and data visualizations about what's going on, and they provide the data behind these things. So, and you can read here about how they collected that data and what it's about. So for the purposes of this video and this demonstration, where we're just trying to learn some D3 and practice, I'm not going to worry too much about that. But that's another thing that happens very often, is once you start exploring the data, you realize, hey, I have this data, but what exactly does it mean? What's this plus mean? For the purpose of the story, would I want to just put all the East Mediterranean things together? There's East Med, right? So there's all kinds of stuff we can do there. Anyway, this console.table trick is really nice, but let's look at what just console.logging the routes would look like. And this is the routes here. So it's just a set of objects with a key and a values, right? So that's what d3.nest gives us back. So let's take a look at, I see the other things we did was roll up the starts and the ends to kind of get a sense for what starting points and ending points. But for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to worry about that. You can always play with this code on your own and check that out. Let's bring this table back. So the thing we want to do is just turn this table into a bar chart, right? I mean, that's very logical. The other thing is that we want this table not just to be the counts of these entries, but we want to sum up the price that was, the prices, so that we can see how much was spent traveling along each route in aggregate. So let's start by getting our data right. And if we want to add up the prices, what we need to do is, instead of returning the length of this, and close the console briefly, we'll just check our work in a second. The leaves are actually just an array of the entries that correspond to a given route. So what we can do is say sum equals 0, leaves.for each, and we're going to return sum, and we're going to say sum plus equals d.price. So now when we look at our console, I've noticed that console.table kind of messes with the rendering, so you have to just force it to I don't know. Not sure why it won't render console.table. Oh, okay. I guess you have to clear. I've noticed it's slightly janky when you're updating console.table statements a lot, and when you first open the console. But anyway, so here's our prices. Now we have these bigger numbers. We'll want them in euros and displayed properly, but here is the perfect data for a bar chart, really. So why don't we start off making one? And now that we know we have our data, we also need to check real quick. So we have this pre where we're rendering the that raw data, but really we want an SVG. And I'm going to go ahead and just change this to an SVG, get rid of these things, and this is more like what the raw or a fresh block would look like anyway. And instead of stringifying the data here, we're going to start down here, SVG equals d3.select SVG. Now I'm just going to go ahead and select all the rectangles, bind the data to it, and I'll do what I normally do is I usually save my selection and then I do the enter. So this will create a rectangle for every rectangle that doesn't exist yet, that corresponds to the data array. So this is the enter update exit pattern we're going through. I'm going to set the I'm also going to make it so that I'm selecting all the rectangles with the route class. So I'm going to make sure that the created rectangles have the route class. And then I'm going to set attributes on my rectangle. So rectangles need to have an X position. I'm just going to set it to 100, a Y position, a width, and a height. So now we actually see a rectangle here for each of our routes. And what we can do here is actually, so here all the rectangles get the same width and height of 20 by 20. Obviously we're going to want to change that to be driven by the data. The way that we do that is these functions. So the X position can actually always be in the same place. So this doesn't need to be a function of the data. But the Y position, let's say we just want to space them all out. We can say 100 plus I times 25, let's say. So this will evenly space them all out based on the order of the data. So I is the index. And yeah, so then the next thing we want to do is make our width a function of the data. Let's say d.values. But if we click this, we'll see that they go way off the screen because remember our values are in the millions of euros. So we need to scale those to fit in our screen. So to make that work, I'm going to say var x scale, let's say, equals d3s scale linear. The domain is going to be a number between 0 and the max of our data. We don't have max defined. And the range is going to go from 0 to the width of the screen. Let's just hard code it to 900 for now. It's usually 960. We'll do, we'll get into the particulars of that. So let's make the max d3.max routes. And here we can say, this is basically d3 will calculate the max for us and we'll return d.values. So what this does, and values is actually a single value if you remember. I'm gonna clear this. So values, that's just what d3.nest names that attribute, but that's the number that we want to scale by. So this is going to go through each of the values in this array and pluck out the maximum value so we can scale to that. So now we can make this x scale d.values, and we have something much more workable, instead of a linear scale, we might actually want to use a log scale, but that means we can't start it at 0. So this is something also more workable, and then instead of 900, let's make it 800. So now we have all these. Let's bring it in even shorter so we have room to mark up on the side. And let me see, if we make this 50, 100, it just makes it shorter. Let's keep that at 0. So let's go ahead and add some labels. We'd like to see the route on the left and the dollar or the euro values on the right. So let's do that real quick. Another thing we might do is actually give this more space. There we go. All right, so let's see here. The simplest way to do this, actually, what I do a lot, is just copy this stuff. We're going to make the labels with the exact same pattern. Instead of recs, we're going to do text. And it's going to be label, labels, labels, labels. This is a text label. And we can use X and Y as well. We might want to make this 100, and we can use the text, so we can return the key. So now we have our keys. We don't really need a height, don't really need a width, and we might add, so this is kind of a hacky way of sundry things, but let's see, I think this is all always confusing to remember because the SVG is different than the CSS for HTML. So I think it's text anchor. And so yeah, so then if we start this at the same 200 or maybe 205. The other thing is this, the text baseline, and I think it's baseline middle. No, it's alignment baseline middle. Wait, let's see. Alignment baseline. Search for this real quick. Obviously, I do this quite a lot. So yeah, alignment baseline's middle. So then, why is it? I want to do the same as the bars. But, oh, one of them is undefined, maybe? Oh, I see, the undefined one. So that's why I'm moving it too high. So instead, let's do not any, and then we'll move the X to like 195. Now we have a more properly, and we can probably move this down another pixel. So I'm finagling with the pixels here, and there's more robust solutions like using EMs or, but for the purpose of this, you're making a one-off graphic, I think it's okay to just kind of interactively get something working. And if you really want to invest in a more robust text positioning thing, that's something you can play with. So now that's cool, but let's get the prices on the other side. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste, something I highly encourage you to do until you have done it enough times that you can just do it without copy pasting, or even now I could do it without copy pasting, but it's faster. So this is the money, I'm going to call this money for lack of a better description. This way we don't overwrite the same text. And here we're going to do the values, but we don't want the X to be the same place. We're going to do this plus some value, and we're just going to copy the width here. So, no, but we want the baseline, this to be start. Yeah, there's our money. And we want to maybe add some more space. There we go. And we want this to also have the euro symbol. So last time I went somewhere and Googled it, but I can just copy paste it here. I'll just say this plus. So now we got our euro symbol. Want to use commas. So let's make a money a formatter. Formatter equals d3.format. And I just happen to remember that it's comma D, I think. But I'll show you a good way to find out. So there's the comma. I think in a lot of European countries, at least in the Netherlands, I know it's true, they use periods. Oh, but that doesn't work. Anyway, we'll continue being American-centric. Sorry about it. But d3.format, I think if you Google this example, Zan has a really great block on all the different formatters. So here, if you put a number like 1,000,000 or 100,000, I guess, this is the one we wanted. You can see all the different ways that you could format that number. Here's in the S format. Let's try that one out. I'll close some of these. If we did, where's my formatter? Change this to S. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. That's too high precision. So you could play with that. Let's just leave it like that. You see people spent 200 million here, 1,000,000 euros in the West African route, and on down the line. So we're pretty close to what we had before. And the only thing that I wanted to show still, a couple of things that I do very often is, like on the rectangles, I will add an on-click DI. And this is, really helpful when you're debugging. So right now, we got things kind of working, but this is super quick to do. You just console, actually I usually log it like this, ID. And now if I click on one of these bars, oh wow, this table thing really, it will show me the data and the index, so number 2 and the object with the key and the value. So this is really handy for just kind of in a more complicated visualization. Just add a click handler that console.logs. In fact, I bet we could do it with fewer. Let me also console or comment out this table so we don't mess things up. Ooh, but I was sorting the route here, and that was good. And sorting happens in place. This is just a shortcut for sorting in descending order. The way that JavaScript sort functions work is slightly strange. You return a negative number or a positive number, and that determines the sort order. But if you do like B value minus A value, so like it gets past 2 objects to compare, then the biggest ones will end up first. And if you switch this to A and B, which we can do real quick, then the smallest ones end up first. Let's do the biggest ones. So, and sorting happens in place, so it actually changes the array when you sort it. It doesn't, you don't need to like save it into a new array and use that. So here I'm clicking on a bar and it's console logging. I think you could actually just pass console.log to the click handler. Oh, that doesn't work. Never mind. So anyway, that works. So always do that. Also, another quick thing to do is mouse over. I want to do a hover. So an interesting thing to note about all these function DI things, right? So this is true of these in attributes and the clicks, the mouse events. Anytime that you're using D3 to do a mouse functionality, we can access this option. So if we select this, that will be the bar itself. So we could say something like adder fill red. So as we hover over it, we'll turn them all red. So then we want to do the same thing on the mouse out. We'll fill it back to black. So now we have ourselves a little hover. So that's a nice quick interaction. Of course, in these functions, you could trigger some kind of tooltip or console log or whatever you want to do. You can highlight some other chart because you'd have access to the data. So if you had another chart corresponding. But anyway, this is about all I wanted to get through for a simple bar chart using d3.nest. And I hope it's helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't do music in the background. A lot of people were like, why do you always put music? I know a lot of people are like, hey, I like the music. I like the music too. It kind of keeps me on pace and it's fun. But, you know, this was actually easier to make without the music. So I'm just going to try to make more videos for now. And we'll see what happens. If you have some suggestions for pretty long instrumentals, sort of hip-hop-ish, it could be pretty chill or whatever. Royalties, or not royalties, but copyright is always an issue with YouTube too. So I don't know. Let me know if this was helpful. Let me know in the comments. I'm trying to make more. Finally, I'm gonna say fork this so it will create a copy, right? We can go see the block. Oh, let me also this would be money bars. Save the title, and then I'm going to make a screenshot here with my Mac, and I can edit the README. Actually, this is migrants files, and this should be simple bar chart with d3.nest. So I'm going to have that. Save that, and I'm going to upload this thumbnail. So it's just going to be the latest screenshot, and it auto resizes because my Mac has Retina or whatever high res, so that screenshot's huge, but you only need a 230 pixel screenshot for your blocks preview. So I'm going to click save thumbnail. It saved it. So now if I go to my blocks page, then it should be there. I have to refresh it probably. Sometimes it takes a minute if your blocks page gets cached, but it is there. I've done this a bunch of times. These are all other thumbnails. One way to check if you're really skeptical is go to the underlying gist, which is where all the code gets saved anyway. So we have our README, we have our index.html, and we have our thumbnail.png. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe learned something. Let me know what else you want to see. All right. Later.